So I'm here as black. So I'll flip it round so that we're watching as white. So you can play, yeah, you play your first move. So you've said that you've been playing the King's Indian.
Yes, I'm not sure how accurately, but you know,
yeah. So is that yeah? Because there's different King's Indians. So well, you need to make your first move anyway because
right, right.
otherwise it'll abort.
Otherwise, it'll just board. Okay, I'll just start with the
Okay.
yeah, E4.
Okay. So E4, yeah, classic opening. So we don't need to do any analysis on that. So I'm going to play E5, which is probably the response that you will see the most often. Okay, so yeah, so what I want to do with this is to try and identify, some of the biggest areas where you might improve and get the most rapid improvement as well. I think that's important. Okay, so yeah, so what would your next move be?
Either D3 or knight to F3. I've been kind of going.
So yeah, did you say D3?
Yes.
Okay. So
but
yeah,
usually I would go with the knight.
Okay, maybe you've got 5 seconds to make a move, so you need to move one of them.
Oh, really? Okay. Crap.
Okay.
There's a. Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's it. Why is it want to auto abort? Okay. Right. So I'm going to play. I'll play classic. Right. So now I don't think we both played 2 moves. It won't abort now. Okay. So one issue with D3. If that's not, I mean, it's valid. It's a book move, but one problem with D3, if the pawn goes on there, is that it could block off your light squared bishop from coming out into the board. But if you wanted to play like G3 and then put your bishop on G2, then that's one way around that. So okay, so I've played knight to C6. So currently, obviously, your knight is looking at my pawn there, and my knight is defending the pawn. So this is a very classic, common way to start the game. So from here, very often you might see bishop come to C4, which is the Italian game, or you get bishop B5, which is the Spanish or the Ruy Lopez. They are very common. You might see knight to C3. You might see D4, which is what I've been playing recently, which is the Scotch. So tell me your thoughts about. So is this a position that you've seen a few times?
Yes. Many of the opponents seem to play. I'm not even aware enough of their opening unless they're making like almost exactly the same King's Indian or something. I'm kind of familiar with some of the names you mentioned, but I've been trying to stick with one thing and kind of master that.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So it's a little bit harder as black because you don't know how your opponent's going to start the game, but this is a position you'll see a lot. So I think what you don't need to be doing when you're making your way to 1000 is you don't need to remember a lot of moves. You don't need to remember a lot of openings. Far more important is the principles, which is control the center, develop your minor pieces, which is your knights and your bishops, get your king castled, and then maybe get your queen out, centralize your rooks. Okay. So yeah, from here, how would you normally proceed?
I would, unless my pawn is under attack, I would normally proceed with G3.
Okay. Okay, so G3. Yes. Yeah. So your plan is to fianchetto this light squared bishop on g2, and then
Yes.
castle kingside, yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Very solid. Yeah. So you're playing that. So, right. How would I respond here? I think... So I will probably intend to play d7 at some point. So I think before I do that, I want to bring my dark squared bishop out. So I will play bishop to c5, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Should I proceed?
So what I want you to be thinking about on every move is primarily making sure that your pieces are safe.
Uh-huh.
Okay? Now, right now, you need to scan your own pieces to make sure that everything's protected and count any attackers and count how many defenders there are. So right now, the only piece that I could take on the next turn is what? I think there's only
F2.
one. Yeah.
Pawn on F2.
Yeah, so I could capture on F2, but that would be kind of a sacrifice at this point. It'd be very early sacrifice, and you can then recapture with the king. So
Right.
these pawns next to your king on the F file, which is F2 for white and F7 for black, they are always key targets and key weaknesses. And the reason is that at the start of the game, if I just rewind here, at the start of the game, these two pawns are only defended by the king.
Right.
Only defender
Right.
of that. So that's why they're a target. So I've already got a bishop that's looking at that pawn. Now, when you move your bishop and then castle, you will then have two pieces defending that pawn. So you can go ahead and fianchetto the bishop. So the fianchetto just means that you move your bishop to either g2 for your king's bishop or b2 for your queen's bishop. And normally behind a pawn. And it's good because it puts these bishops on potentially a very long diagonal pointing right towards the corner, pointing towards the rook at the start.
Right.
Or if your opponent castles that way, then it's going towards the king and towards a target down there. Okay. So right now, we're still in the same situation. There's only one piece that I could capture, and I'm not going to sacrifice my bishop at this point in the game. So I'll play d6, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want to allow my light squared bishop to come into the game somewhere. And so my next moves, and if you think about it, so why did black play that move? Well, it's to open up this diagonal for the light squared bishop, right? Now it's not going to go there because it'll just be captured. It's not going to go there because it'll be captured by the pawn. So where is this bishop going to go? It'll go maybe to one of these three squares: d7, e6, and g4. The most likely square is probably g4.
Right.
Because then what it would be doing there would be pinning this knight. So your knight on f3 couldn't move because the bishop would then capture your queen. Okay. So would you go ahead and castle now or develop more pieces?
I would castle first, normally.
Yeah.
But
Go for it. Yeah, that's fine. So now you've got the only piece that I can capture. So the only piece that's on prise is your f2 pawn still, and that is now defended twice. Defended by your rook and defended by your king. So this is a very solid way to start the game. Okay, so now I'll bring my bishop out to here, g4. So now you need to log in your mind that knight is pinned. That knight cannot move.
Right.
And one of the things you must always think about is, if I have a piece that's pinned, could it be attacked by another piece of lower value, like a pawn in this case? The only piece lower value than a knight is a pawn. And you're okay, because none of these black pawns can get to you. Right? This pawn can't move on e5, and these pawns are a long way away. Okay, so you've now got yourself a safe position. Looks good. So my next move, most likely move, would be knight to f6. Oh, no, it's your move, of course, right?
Oh, is it?
Some people might be tempted to push the h pawn now and try and kick this bishop away, but I don't think that's in the spirit of the King's Indian. You want to keep this nice defense very solid around your king, and then you want to be attacking probably on the queen side of the board, or from the queen side of the board. Okay, so what would tell me your thought process for what you would aim to do next in the game?
Well, I had my queenside rook pinned a couple of times, so I'd like to move the knight out on the queen side.
Mm-hmm.
Some before I forget or something.
Yeah.
So, earlier in the game.
So would it be something like you move your pawn, you move your dark squared bishop out, and then that leaves b2 undefended? Maybe. So I'm not sure what you mean by your queen being pinned.
I'll sometimes just I'll put the knight on the queen side, b1 to c3. Yeah.
I mean, that's a perfectly good move. It's because right now, if you look at
pawn,
if you look at all your pieces on the board now, which of your pieces are undefended?
Undefended. The e4 pawn.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. And I think everything else is protected. I mean, your rooks, ignore the rooks. They don't really count, but yeah. So a good thing about knight to c3 is it adds a defender to the pawn on e4. What other moves might you have that also defend that pawn?
d3 pawn.
Yeah, d3 is another excellent move. I think either of those moves next would be great.
Okay.
So
should I go ahead?
Play one of those. Okay. Another move could also be rook to e1, which would defend it. You might play that move later. So normally you want to think about, you want to get your minor pieces, which is your bishops and knights, out into the board where they have an influence on the board. So yes, I think d3 is great. Pawn to d3. Because
I just made that. Okay.
Yep. Because that now will allow your dark square bishop to come out into the board. No? Okay, so let me see what I'm going to do. I'll just play a normal developing move. I'm going to play knight to f6. That now would allow me to castle kingside. And now you've got some options, but I think knight to c3 looks very sensible.
Okay.
All right. So now, I'm just going to play my queen out here. I might castle kingside or queenside now. Okay, so now your last minor piece, you've got one more minor piece to develop.
And
so
this is like a mirror.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's a good square. So you've you're now pinning my knight on f6. So my knight now can't move, because if I move anywhere like h5, You're going to take my queen, and I'll be in trouble. Okay,
Right.
so what will I do? What will I do now? I think a common thing you'll see would be the kick. Right. So
Uh-huh.
I've played at h6,
Uh-huh.
and now
Mhm.
it's called I'm kicking the bishop.
Right.
And so you've got a few options. Tell me which squares are safe for your bishop.
Well, usually I've been just taking the knight, but h4, but then it's kind of stuck.
It's very stuck on h4. So if you play
Right.
bishop to h4 and I play pawn to g5,
Right. Get
then it's
nowhere.
trapped, right? So you're going to
Right.
lose your bishop. You might take one pawn, that's it, okay? Or
Right.
might take two pawns, actually. Um,
Right.
so,
E3 or D2 is fine too, but
yeah, e3 or d2. So if you put it on e3, which you can do, that's perfectly good idea, then
uh-huh.
we have some tension, because I could capture with my dark squared bishop, and then
Right.
you would have to recapture with what?
With the pawn.
Yeah. Okay. And that's not bad for you. That's okay.
Right.
Because what it does is you've got a rook on the f file now. Okay. So why
Uh-huh.
don't you go ahead and do that? You can play bishop to d2, which is kind of slow and conservative, or you can play bishop
Mhm.
to e3, which is a bit more interesting.
Mhm.
But they're both okay.
Okay. I've been normally just taking the knight because it's less clutter, but
Yeah, so you're trying to make the
I'll,
board simpler. I get that. Yeah, but
right.
here's something to remember. Okay, um,
Uh,
your pawns that are out in the board.
uh-huh.
Have you got more pawns on light squares or dark squares?
uh, Light squares.
Yeah. So you're thinking mainly about. I mean, you've got four pawns on dark squares and four pawns on light squares at the moment, right? But
Oh, is it?
yeah,
Okay.
all in all. But the key area of the board is c2, d3, e4. Right? This
Uh-huh.
is your pawn chain in the middle of the board. Now,
Right.
with that pawn chain, your bishops are important pieces.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and your dark squared bishop has a special power because it can move between these pawns. Okay,
Mm.
so that bishop is one of your pieces that can move around a lot of the board. Your light squared bishop is just sitting back, it's defensive right now, right? It's in a
Uh-huh.
defensive role. Your dark squared bishop is quite powerful,
Mm.
okay, because it
Mm.
can access a lot of the board in theory, moving around and
Right.
between these key pawns in your pawn chain. So I would have said that swapping off your knight, sorry, swapping off your dark squared bishop for black's knight at this point in the game would not be better for you.
Oh,
Yeah. So,
okay.
and I understand the kind of idea of simplifying the board, but what I want to think about is if you try and visualize that if the bishop takes the knight and then the queen takes the bishop back,
Mm.
right? Um, so there's no knight on the board and there's no bishop on the board. Does that
Right.
situation look better for black? Is it slightly better for black or is it slightly better for white? And I would say it's slightly maybe better for black and slightly more
Right.
dangerous for you because this queen is now in a slightly more threatening position. That's all. Okay. So
Uh-huh.
I think
Right.
that's a good move. Now
Okay.
let's say I capture and we have an exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So what this means is that you have this light squared pawn structure. Black has a dark squared pawn structure, which is quite common. And yeah, you may as well go ahead and recapture the bishop
Okay.
because we don't want to run out of time. Okay, so
Right.
this is interesting. So you're now in a very solid situation. I'm sure that this position has been seen many, many times in chess. And you
Uh-huh.
do have this thing called doubled pawns. But they're doubled in the middle of the board, and that's not a bad thing, because what you might do at some point in future is push d3. And then if my pawn captures, you can recapture with e3, and you've undoubled your pawns. You'll now have a strong pair of pawns in the center. So let's think. I'm just, it's my go and I'm black, aren't I? Okay. So I'm gonna castle queenside. So now let's think about this. So could pushing d4 work now? Yeah. Yeah. So So with this pawn moving from f2 to e3, it's changed the board, and you have to say, okay, right, what has changed on the board? Well, you've got these doubled pawns, but now you've got more. You've got a pawn majority in the middle. So go ahead and push d4 now.
Okay.
And we'll see what happens, right? So black captures, and now you recapture with e3. Okay. Now, you can see from this, now you've got this nice strong pair of pawns in the middle of the board. And those pawns are controlling those 4 squares. C5, D5, E5, F5 are all now controlled by pawns. And what that means is that black cannot put a piece on any of those squares. He might push a pawn. So let's say black pushes a pawn. I mean, so one thing you have to be aware of, could the black's knight capture on d4? So,
yes, because I cannot capture it back with the knight.
Okay, because the knight's pinned.
Right.
But
But I'll just take the knight with the queen then.
Yeah, you take it with the queen. Right. So, you know, this is a strong position for you. You've undoubled your pawns by forcing an exchange of pawns. So this is all good. Okay. Now let's say I'm going to play rook e8. So I've now, what we would say is completed development. Okay. I've got all my minor pieces out in the board. I've got my queen off the back rank, and my rooks are connected. Okay. This means my rooks can see each other. You need to do one more thing to complete development, which is to get your queen off the back rank. So you can do that, and you can break the pin on the knight if you do that.
Right.
So probably the worst square to move your queen to
would be e2.
e2, because if you put it on e2, the knight is still. So what would be a better square for your queen?
Say, let me see, d3 or d2.
D3 or d2? Yeah. I like, out of those, I think d3 is slightly better. And the reason is because, so you can go ahead and do that. The reason is because it's another defender on this knight. This knight now has 1, 2, 3 defenders.
Right.
Which looks good for you. Okay, so you've got a solid position. You've got your pawns are all, you've got good center control. Your rooks are now connected, and you've completed development. So now we enter the phase of the game that's called the middle game. Yeah, the opening is complete because we've both castled, developed our minor pieces, got our queens off the back rank, connected our rooks. Okay, so yeah, so it's now black to move. So I would consider, can I capture that pawn? Well, no, I can't capture that pawn because my queen could be taken by a knight. So that would be losing.
Right.
Could I? Sorry, I'm thinking on white now. Could I capture that pawn with a knight? It's possible. Yeah, maybe I could capture that pawn with a knight. So then, if knight recaptures, queen recaptures, queen takes queen, rook takes queen. So that's quite complex. Okay. So what it is that you've got, Well, let's do it. I'm going to go ahead and capture. So what do we've got a situation where I've got 1, 2, 3 attackers. Okay. And you've got 1, 2 defenders. If you've got more attackers than defenders, then you can go ahead and you will win the piece. Okay. So maybe a better move instead of queen d3, because you need to be counting attackers and defenders, 1, 2, 3 attackers, and that means you need 3 defenders. Maybe a better move would have been rook to e1 first. Okay, so let's think this through. So if I capture now, then you've got a choice. So I've basically won a pawn.
Right.
Okay? So what am I threatening to do maybe with my knight on the next turn? It looks like I've won a pawn.
Right.
What squares could my knight, well, what pieces could my knight capture?
The knight on c3.
Correct, yeah. So if I take the knight on c3, then you can recapture with either the pawn or the queen, and I've basically won a pawn, right? So let's find a move that prevents that knight from capturing your knight. Remember what we said about attackers and defenders against this square on e4, okay? And it's using a tactic that we've already mentioned. You know, we said that this knight here on f3 was pinned, because when the queen was back on d1, the knight couldn't move because the queen would have been captured. Okay, now
I could pin the knight with e1.
Yes, with either
rook
could now come to e1. So out of the two, I think maybe rook a to e1 is maybe a better move, but rook f to e1 is also good. Because the knight on the rook is doing a job right now. It's defending that knight on f3, but the knight is also defended by the bishop and the queen, and it's only got one attack. But that knight's fine. It's over defended right now. So why don't you go ahead and move rook f to e1?
Okay.
Because you might want to use your rook on a to support an attack. You see later on. Okay. So now. So, you know, I'm a beginner and I don't notice that, and I capture your knight, and I'm in trouble. Now you can go ahead and take my queen.
Right.
And this is why
Should I do
it? Well, yeah, I would.
Okay.
It's a free queen.
Right.
Yeah. So now you're up in material. So it looked as though, if I click back, it looked as though you won a pawn with that capture. So I won a pawn with that capture, but you could just move across and pin the knight. And the great thing, this is a really good reason why you want to connect your rooks at the end of the opening, because now, you know, this queen can't really capture the rook because the rooks are defending each other. They're buddies. They've got each other's backs, right? So if I go ahead and that's a big mistake. It's a blunder. You grab my queen, I grab back. Okay. So, and now what would your next move be? So scan the board for any pieces that are undefended.
Undefended.
Looking at white pieces, and we're looking at black pieces that are undefended. So on the white side, I think there's the only piece that's undefended is the pawn on b2, and kind of the rook on a1. So what about
Uh-huh.
black pieces? What black pieces are not defended?
The pawn on h6.
That's actually defended by the
Oh, by the other pawn. That's right. Okay.
yeah. There's a more
So
attractive
the
target.
G7, I guess. That's
Yeah, g7 is undefended, but there's an even
uh-huh.
better target than that.
Uh, uh, A7. Well, that's defended.
You know,
Is it?
a9. But
Uh-huh.
okay, what about in
Undefended.
your half of the board? Look at the two pieces in
Right.
your half of the board.
The knight, of course. The knight.
Yeah, the
Right.
knight is undefended, and actually the bishop on g4 is also undefended.
Right.
So now, because I thought I was just doing an exchange of knights when I captured your knight on c3, but now
Uh-huh.
you can grab my knight, and you're in a very, very
Right.
strong position. But the question is,
Uh-huh.
you've got two pieces that can capture that knight,
Uh-huh.
and which one
I
is
would
the best?
I would capture it with the queen,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
just because it's not double rook. I mean double pawn.
Okay. But
Should I go ahead?
well,
No.
I would also consider capturing with a pawn,
Uh-huh.
and there's a reason for that. So if you go ahead, capture with b2, and we'll see what the board looks like then. Okay. So
It opens that column, I guess.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've
Okay.
opened up. We now have what's called a semi-open B file. That
Uh-huh.
means that you don't have one of your pawns on that file,
Uh-huh.
and you've got this nice rook on a1 that hasn't played any part in the game yet, but now it could be time for that rook to come into the game.
Uh-huh.
So let's say, okay, I'm going to double my rooks. Okay, so now I've put both of my rooks on the same file. They're both on the E file. And you need to be careful now that I don't play the rook from E7 to E1 and trap your king.
Right.
But you're kind of okay. Right now you've got
Right.
a piece that can defend that square, which is your rook. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And you've got another piece. You've actually got two pieces. Can you see another piece that's defending that square?
Which one?
E1.
Oh, the knight. The
Correct.
knight.
Yeah. So I can't dive in with that move yet.
Right.
That would be
Uh-huh.
losing, right?
Uh-huh.
So what you might think about now is maybe starting to think about an attack.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and you need at least two pieces to attack the enemy king. Generally,
Right.
three. Three is better. The more pieces that you can include in your attack, the better. So have a think. How might you use your bishop to attack my king?
Well, I would try to kick the black bishop away first
Yeah. So
with the pawn.
what square do you think is the most vulnerable target right now on black's camp?
Uh,
So if you're thinking about now, you want to put together like a checkmating attack.
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
What square do you think would be good to attack? Remember how we said at the beginning of the game, the F pawns are weak because they're only defended by a king.
Right.
Can you find a square that's only defended by the king?
B7.
Sorry, B7 is only defended by the black king. Now,
Uh-huh.
what you need to think about now is how can you line up at least two of your pieces against that square?
Right. I see. Okay. That's a that's a that's a logical insight I haven't thought of.
Mm.
It's pretty cool.
And this is,
So if I could line
remember
up,
what I said at the beginning of the game as well, that you
uh-huh,
fianchettoed your bishop on g2, right?
uh-huh,
And one of the things that I said to you was the great thing about the bishop fianchetto, which is why it's a common move, a common kind of pattern, is that it lines up on a very long diagonal, the longest possible
uh-huh,
diagonal on the board.
uh-huh,
So your bishop is actually looking. It's a long range piece, and it is looking towards b7,
uh-huh,
but it can't
uh-huh,
get to b7 quite yet because there's a knight in the way, and in fact,
uh-huh.
there's two knights in the way.
Right,
There's a black knight, and there's your own knight as well.
right.
So I would suggest you move your white knight now
Mm-hmm.
and move it somewhere safe that moves it slightly towards black's king. Because remember, knights are short range fighters.
Right.
You know, it's like that TIE fighter that they see in Star Wars and New Hope. You say that's a short range fighter. It can't be that far from its base.
Right. Right.
So maybe
Uh,
your knight could join into the attack in some way.
mm-hmm.
So how can you start to move your knight or maneuver it towards black's king?
Um, Towards Black's king. I would have to retreat first, like to D2 or something.
Yeah, d2. So go ahead and do that.
Okay.
d2 is a safe square.
Okay.
Now this does now open up the possibility of an attack here. Okay, so I've just delivered a check because that
Right.
knight was defending e1, but now it isn't.
Right.
You have to get out of
Right.
check. You've got two options, and one of them is bad and one of them is good.
Mm.
So what are your two options? When you're in check, there are only a few things you can do. You can capture the attacker, you can
Mm-hmm.
move the king, or you
Uh-huh.
can put a piece in the way of the check.
Uh-huh.
So actually you have three different moves that you can do. Well, technically four. Your time's running low now, so we need to
Oh, okay.
need to hurry up.
I would just capture it.
You can capture it. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and capture it. It's fine. Because remember as well, you are up in material. Okay,
Right.
I've lost my queen.
Right.
You're up in material, and therefore
Uh-huh.
captures make sense for you. If you trade
Uh-huh.
off pieces of equal value,
Uh-huh.
then it's better for you. So I've recaptured. You're in check again, and now you have three possible moves. Two of them are okay, and one of them is very bad. The
I
bad
would.
one would be queen to f1.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would move the knight to f1.
You can move the knight to f1, or you can move the king to f2.
Yeah, maybe king to f2 is better, maybe.
Yeah, I think king to f2 is better, and the reason is because it's a forcing move. King to f2. So go ahead and play that.
Okay.
King to f2 gets you out of check, and it also attacks the black rook.
Uh-huh.
And that means that now black now has to use his next turn to get black rook
Out.
to safety. Okay, so I'm going to move it
Right.
back to there. Okay, so what that means is that because I've been forced to protect my rook,
Uh-huh.
that now I can't then progress my own plans. All right, I've had to use my turn to defend my rook. So now I think a good idea would be to start using you want to get rid of black's knight now. Black's knight is in the way of b7.
Right.
So
I'll put pawn forward on
Yeah,
d4
yeah,
to d5?
yeah. Do that. Do d5. D5 is pretty good. I mean, the one problem with it is it blocks off your bishop,
Right.
but it does force my knight to move. So where can my knight go? Okay, knights can go to maximum of 8 squares,
Uh-huh.
provided they're in the middle of the board. Okay, so out of all the squares, I can run away to there, I can run away to there. That's not good. B4 is not good because it will be captured, so I can't really advance my knight. I'm going to put my knight to here.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to move my knight to here. So that there's a threat. What's the threat?
The queen.
Okay, so how can you do a multi-purpose move? You need to protect your queen, and you also want to start attacking black. So I can see one interesting move here, which might look a bit odd, but I'm thinking queen to h7 might be good.
h7. h7. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the king is now on an empty back rank.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm running low on time. Okay.
Yeah, you're low on time, but I think this is we don't have to complete the game. It's all right. But, So, but we're using my time now.
Okay.
So, an idea for your queen could be to move to h8 or g8 with check, and that could cause problems for my king. Now, what if, let's say, the queen goes to h8? How many options does the black king have?
Well, it could.
Sorry, how many options does black have for getting out of check?
Right. It could. The king could move to the 7 file, or the rook could block, but that would be kind of not good because.
Okay, so let's say black kind of blunders here. Let's say black moves the knight back. Okay, so how can you finish the game?
Oh,
you've got 49 seconds to win.
Oh, can I finish the game? Let's see.
So execute that attack that we were talking about, a back rank attack. Okay, now I no longer have d7, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can the king move out of check? The king can only move here or here, right? Can't move out of check. So that's not an option. Can black capture the piece that's got the king in check? No. So the only other option now is to interpose a piece. So I could, for example, interpose the rook. In fact, I'll put the knight there first, right? That doesn't save me.
Right.
Capture the knight. Okay. And now actually my king can escape to here. So that's kind of okay. So I made the right move there. I think if I'd have done rook to e8, that would have been losing because you would have just captured that. So I could escape now, right? But you're in a very, very strong position. So yeah. So right now, I mean, you've got a piece that you can capture. You can capture g7. Okay, down to 14. Right. I don't think I can give you extra time on this, which is unfortunate. Okay. So now what you've got now is you've got a fork situation where your queen could attack. It could capture h6, and it can capture the bishop on g4. And what's interesting is that pawn there is on a dark square, and the bishop is on a light square. So this bishop can't move and and defend the pawn. Okay. So, I mean, the time's run out now. We should have probably done a 60-minute and given ourselves more time. But yeah, so let's say what am I going to do as black now? I'm gonna. Well, I've got to check. Okay, now you would have to move your king out the way because that rook's actually protected by the bishop, so you can't capture. So you'd have to move out the way. But okay, so we finished on time. But I think this is very important. So are you looking at my screen or are you looking at your own screen?
I'm going back and forth. Now I'm looking at your screen.
Okay, so let's do a recap on the game. Okay, so I'll talk you through the principles. Okay, so you started with white e4, the most common opening as white. The reason why e4 is more common than d4 is that e4 opens up diagonals for your queen and for your bishop to come out into the board, right? Alternatively, d4 opens up a diagonal for your dark squared bishop to come out, but the other diagonal it opens up is actually going towards your king. Is potentially weakening. So that's why e4 is the most common opening. e5 is the most common reply that you see at beginner level, and it's a very standard opening. Grandmasters tend to play c5 more, which is called the Sicilian, but I don't play that. I've never played it. Now you develop a minor piece. Black develops a minor piece. And now you're preparing your structure with a fianchetto. That's good. Black develops a minor piece. Okay. What this means now is that black's got a slight advantage in development because black's got 2 pieces out in the board, whereas white's only got 1. Okay, but now you develop your bishop. This is a very sound defensive structure. Black pushes a pawn. Notice something as well is that at the start of the game, if I go all the way back to the start, okay, the knights can move straight out into the board because knights jump, right? So the knights can jump out into the board as long as they've got a free square to land on. Bishops, on the other hand, cannot move straight out into the board. Okay, but they're going to be useful when they're out in the middle of the board. They're not going to be as useful sitting there on the back rank, getting in the way of the other pieces, getting in the way of the king castling. So in order for your bishops to come out into the board, then let's say the light square, let's look at your bishops. Okay, so your dark square bishop on c1 can't get out into the board because it's blocked off by 2 pawns. And that means that one of those pawns has to move for this bishop to come out into the board. And normally it's the d pawn, right? And the same goes for your light square bishop on f1. It's also blocked in by 2 pawns. So one of those pawns has to move. And that's why we have situations where the central pawns tend to move first. Okay. Now you've got, you're doing this King's Indian, which is great. Okay. And now that I've got my dark squared bishop out, I can think about moving my d pawn, right, which will let my other bishop out into the board. Okay, so the d pawn moves, you castle. Now my other bishop comes out. We have a pin situation. This knight cannot move. It's pinned. You play d3. I develop my final minor piece. You develop a minor piece. I move my queen. You develop your final minor piece, right? This is a very, very solid, sound, attractive chess game. I kick the bishop. Bishop retreats into a position where it's in tension with black's dark square bishop. We have an exchange and you recapture with the pawn, giving you double pawns in the center of the board, but you can resolve that. Black castles, you push d4. And with the threat here is that you're going to push d5 next, and that will force this knight to move and take away this knight's favorite square or favorite defensive square. Reason why the knight is happy there, one reason is it's defending h7.
Right.
Yeah. If this knight moves, there's no defense of h7 and this king is vulnerable. This is a doorway to the king. So you know, this would be a threat. So I can't have that threat. I capture the pawn, you recapture, undoubling your pawns and dominating the center of the board with your pawns. So that's good. We still have a situation where your knight is pinned. Rook comes to the center. This is generally a good idea, particularly when you've either got semi-open files, because the E file is semi-open, there's no black pawn on there. Yeah.
Right.
And one thing you have to remember about your pawns is that, like, I could charge through, burst through with a barrage of pieces against your pawns, for example. Okay, so let's say, you know, I could attack this pawn. I could sacrifice 1, 2, 3 pieces to break through. Okay, I can never capture my own pawn. So pawns, your own pawns can sometimes be an obstacle or a hindrance to your own ideas.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and sometimes you can end up with a situation where, let's say, a white pawn captures there, right, and you just move your king in front of it, because white can never, ever capture that piece because it's his own piece. So you can sometimes use your opponent's pawns as a human shield in that way, right? So anyway, so we've got a semi-open file, which means that there's no black pawn on here, and that makes it an attractive file for black to use to attack. So it's good to have your pieces lined up on that file. Right? So carrying on, the queen comes out into the board. This is good because it connects the rooks together. Now the rooks are safe, and they are patrolling that back rank, keeping the king secure. Now the knight comes in, and this looks like I'm winning a pawn because I've got more attackers than defenders. 1, 2, 3 attackers against this square, and white only has 1, 2 defenders. So it looks as though black can attack, but now white responds with a tactic, with a pin. And it's an unpleasant pin because this knight now can't move. But the knight blunders, and it captures there, and you capture the queen, recapture, and now you get the knight. So now you're significantly ahead in material. Now the rooks double up, which is good. Rooks like to be doubled up. And we have an attack. Capture, capture. King moves out of the way. And this is good for white because you've, when you're ahead in material, it's good for equal trades are in your favor. So the rook has to run away, right? This is a good move. In fact, it's yeah. You did have other moves. So like we said, you could have put the queen there, which would have been really dumb because the rook takes. You could have put the knight there, and there's nothing wrong with that move either. But I think the king to f2 was good because it attacks the rook and makes black have to respond. So the rook runs away. And now we force the knight to move. Knight comes out with an attack on the queen. Queen comes into a dangerous situation. And now we have material falling. So if you'd have had time, this would have been an easy game for you to win. Yeah?
Well, I mean, I've lost so many games in the end game while I was... I think mainly because of my impatience. Beginner, impatience.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Do you know, if I'm ever playing somebody rated under 1,000 and we get to an end game, that I tend to be very confident. End games is one of those areas where beginners just don't train. And very often you think, it's just, we've just got to let the end game just like follow its course, and you just throw your pieces around. And but apparently one of the reasons why the Russians were so dominant in chess for so many years was that they trained their players, obviously from a young age, but they trained their players and they started them with endgame training. They studied the endgame strategy over and over and over, and then they moved on to the other more interesting stuff. Right? But they were so good at endgames that it was very, very hard to beat them. So until
I see.
like Bobby Fischer came along, the Russians were incredibly dominant in that. So
I
I
bought,
actually I
I,
posted a video today on Endgames, and there's a really good resource on leechess.com/practice. Sorry, leechess.org.
okay.
Yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
No. I was just saying I'll definitely check that video out. What is it? What's the title?
It's called Endgame Drills or something like that.
Oh, right. No, I just bought two books, one by Bobby Fischer and one by Jose Capablanca.
Yeah.
The Capablanca book is supposed to be all well. It's supposed. I didn't get to the Capablanca book. I've been doing the Bobby Fischer puzzles, but
Wow.
the Capablanca book, I hear it starts with endgame drills.
Oh wow. Brilliant. Yeah.
So
And
check that out.
I know I'm weaker at endgames than I should be as well.
Oh,
They're,
how, I saw that you played over 10,000 games. How long? How long did it take you?
well, look. Here's the thing, though. You playing games doesn't necessarily make you better at chess.
Right.
I mean, playing games, yes, it gives you experience, right? But if you think about it, if I give you a guitar, right, and you sit there for a year and just figure things out on the guitar, then at the end of the year, you might have some tunes that or patterns that you've figured out and stuff like that. But if I give you a guitar and a book that shows you what all the chords are and some songs that show you how to make the songs out of the chords, then you've got your theory, right? And you'll learn way quicker because you've got the structure to learn. And chess is kind of like that. You can learn the rules in an hour. But if all you do is just play, then you are practicing playing at your standard over and over and over and over again. And yes, you will probably improve slowly over time. But if you train as well, then you'll definitely improve quicker. And I think end game training is really important. And the other one is tactics. To be able to see, there's a fork there, there's a pin there, right? I can force my opponent to move. Now here's a checkmate pattern that I can see. And this Lee chess thing is really cool for that. So I think, checkmates is great and end games is great. So I definitely advise you to spend some time on there. And it's free. You don't even have to register to do that.
Did you say Lee chess, as in Lee chess?
It's Li chess. I think because it was created by somebody who was called Lee.
Oh, okay.
His surname was Lee. So it's leechess.org. But yeah, if you check out my end game video, the link to that is in the description of the video.
Okay.
But definitely, if you practice some stuff on there, then that's good. Are you also do you do lessons on chess.com or puzzles on chess.com?
I do puzzles. I think they help a lot. Puzzles, some of them are. I'm learning some stuff from just playing the puzzles.
Yeah, the puzzles are really good. The great thing about puzzles is it teaches you to kind of step back and assess the whole board. And what that then lets you do is take that skill into your own games. So when you are, when you're in the middle of the game, you've got the ability to step back and see the board as it is, rather than, be blinkered into thinking, oh, this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do next. You have to assess the whole board because there may be an opportunity that is there to win the game or to win material or to save a piece that you weren't thinking because you were only thinking along the train tracks, So puzzles is great. But the lessons on chess.com are also really good. So fantastic. So
I haven't checked out some lessons on chess.com, but I should.
Yeah,
are they video? They're like video lessons?
Yes, they are. Yeah, it's a lot more video lessons now. So I would. So my advice to you would be, like, I don't know how many hours a day that you are doing chess right now, but I would take half of that time for study and half of it for playing.
Right.
So if typically you've been playing an hour a day, then study for half an hour and play for 30 minutes as well.
Right.
And you'll definitely improve.
Yeah. Sounds great. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm stuck at around 7. It feels like there's another level of players start at around like 800.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a little gap there, skill gap.
Yeah, it's skill is part of it, but attitude is also a very big part.
Right. Right.
So I think, like I say in my video, slow down, slow down, slow down. Take the time, look at the
Right.
whole board, figure out the story of the board, what's happening.
Yes, that's definitely the thing I appreciated the most from your videos. Like
Cool.
one of the videos you were saying you were playing like a 1500 rated player, and you were saying that it was still not anything different.
Yeah.
Just taking your time and not making blunders and mistakes.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, a really good bit of advice is just try not to make a mistake on each move. If you can do that, you'll be above 1,000 as well.
Right.
Straight away.
Right. It's weird. Yeah, I don't know. Somehow I feel like I'm stuck. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, but thank you
Getting lessons
very
is
much
awesome
for.
as well. I've had a chess lesson this week. I
Oh,
have chess lessons with a national master who's in Holland.
uh-huh,
And it definitely helps me. Every time I get lessons, my rating goes up.
Do you? Okay. Wow.
Because it gets me thinking
Very
differently. That's all it is.
Right.
Anyway, so look, I've really enjoyed this. So I can send you the copy of the recording if you like, and if
Please,
you're
yes.
happy for me to get this on my channel.
Sure. No problem.
Awesome. Well, let's end it there. I mean, it's pretty late here, and I'm ready for my dinner. But in Japan, it must be gone midnight, right?
It's 4:40 in the morning. Late late night in the morning. I'm a night person. I run a bar, so this is my normal time.
So is your bar closed now?
Yes. I'm only open on weekends, and I'm doing some woodwork renovation around the bar, and due to the COVID thing, and
Yeah.
I'll be reopening some with some special events like chess club and English only night or something like that.
Awesome.
Events.
Awesome. Well, look, man, it's been a pleasure to meet you, and I hope it's helpful.
I'm sure it has been, and I'm sure I'll. Yes, I'll enjoy the lesson, watching the lesson, and I really enjoyed the finding the weak spot. I think that's something I can utilize right away. I think.
Good stuff. Well, I'm sure if you watch it back a couple of times, you'll pick up a lot more tips as well.